This is Inside the UCC Group Leadership in Action podcast with your hosts Laura Butler and Jay Maney. This podcast will share groundbreaking initiatives by the university and speak with leading educators, business leaders, and entrepreneurs that are paving the way for growth, transformation, and success.
Welcome to the UCC Leadership in Action podcast. I'm Laura Butler.
And I am Jay Maney. And Laura, I'm excited about today's episode. We're going to hear yet again from another subject matter expert, especially on the heels of the upcoming graduation on July 17th.
Absolutely, which will be virtual, and so many are looking forward to that. Dr. Sandra Reid is a Deputy Dean for Clinical Programs and Senior Lecturer in Psychiatry in the Faculty of Medical Sciences of the University of the West Indies, the UWI St. Augustine, Trinidad. She's a specialist in clinical service and research and has published widely on related topics. Since 2003, she has directed the Caribbean Institute on Addictive Disorders, which has trained over 2,500 Caribbean professionals and paraprofessionals in addictive disorder. Dr. Reid, how do you feel about being one of the recipients of the UCC Doctorate Award?
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me as part of this podcast. And what can I say? Wow, that was totally unexpected and very humbling. I must confess that I didn't even know of the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean, but I perused their website and spoke to a few educators and was quite impressed with the growth and the standing of UCC over a relatively short space of time. I was also quite thrilled to see that their first honoree was Professor Errol Morrison, who was one of my lecturers in biochemistry when I was in medical school. So it certainly felt good to be in such distinguished company. And of course, being in the ranks of my fellow awardees who are esteemed public figures in Jamaica, it was quite a humbling experience. But you know, I just want to say what impacted me the most though was that my work in mental health and psychiatry was being recognized. Because yes, let's face it, psychiatry is wrongly, I might say, not considered real medicine. I was quite delighted that the team of persons who selected the award recipients recognized the importance of addressing the vulnerabilities that lead to mental illness and the significance of keeping people at the peak of their mental health, because that's what my work is about.
Absolutely. That is so true and so important. Tell me, when did you think you wanted to be a medical doctor and psychiatrist? Was that something you always felt you were going to do?
Yeah, well, that actually goes a long way back. I was in primary school, standard 5, 10 years old. My father was my teacher. And I cannot remember the details of what he was sharing with the class. All I remember is being fascinated by human behavior and what was behind the choices and the decisions that people make. I knew right then and there that I wanted to do psychiatry. I was an excellent student and I could have pursued any career I wanted, but there was never a decision that I had to make. It was more of a conviction. I had to go to medical school, not because I wanted to do medicine, but because I had to do medicine to do psychiatry. I never wavered. It was a calling. And I think I was equipped for my calling, both naturally and by virtue of my academic specializing. I tell my students, undergrad and postgraduate, psychiatry is one of those areas where you have to have a natural skill set and a love for what you do. I love what I do, and I'm thankful for those gifts I receive, like empathy and compassion and discernment.
Yes. And since you've taken that career path, what has the experience been like for you?
Well, I look back at when I was on the campus and the attitude towards my decision to specialize in psychiatry. At medical school, we had a magazine called Stethoscope that would include a feature on all the final year students and highlighted, among other things, their chosen specialties. Most people didn't know what they wanted, and that was normal. But I knew what I wanted. And the comment I kept hearing over and over was, you took right to waste your ability on psychiatry. And nothing has changed very much because, unfortunately, the scientific validity of psychiatry is often questioned. And I guess I could understand why. I could understand why we're not seen as real medicine. There are no confirmatory tests for mental disorders, no blood tests, no measurement of neurochemicals. You can't do a CT scan or an MRI to confirm the diagnosis. We basically look at people's thoughts, their emotions, their behavior, and their ability to function in life and with others. So while the field has progressed, we still don't have a very clear cause for mental disorders. And treatment is based mainly on drugs and counseling, neither of which has a clear mechanism for how they work. So if you want to talk about a scientific, psychiatry is not where you go. I guess people would want to hear something like, okay, so you're diagnosed with depression. Let's measure your serotonin levels. They're low. Okay, good. Eat some bananas because they're full of serotonin. Now that you're topped up, you will be fine. But psychiatry and mental disorders are much, much more complex than that. They are an expression of many experiences that are not measurable or that cannot be analyzed statistically. And just because we can't measure anger or happiness doesn't mean that they aren't real. But, my experience in psychiatry to me has brought clarity to me of what mental illness is, an understanding of how it develops. And I have developed a well-defined approach to its treatment, which works very well with my patients. I don't know if you want me to share that approach.
Yes, no, we appreciate what you're saying. And UCC leadership are forward thinkers, and even more so in today's day and age, mental health is a serious issue we're having. And so recognizing you as an awardee and the work that you do is even more important. So we're really grateful to have you on the program to share your insights and experience and guidelines.
Yes. So let me share a little bit then. Yeah.
Dr. Reid, I just wanted to jump in there because I'm salivating here as I'm listening to your responses. They're so compelling. And I say that, well, first of all, congratulations. And thank you for taking time to be on the program today. I know your schedule is very, very busy. But I come from a background where I have degrees in psychology and behavioral science. And I did a little bit of not psychiatry work, but counseling and social work early on in the first few years of leaving college. And I'm a big fan of the field. I thrive on learning more about the world of psychology and psychiatry. But one of the things I've also come to the awareness of is that there's this working dynamic between psychiatry and spirituality. And either they can become allies or antagonists. What are your views on spirituality?
Okay. Well, personally, I'm spiritual and I'm religious. I believe in an omnipotent, omniscient God. And as I grew in relationship with him, it actually influenced my understanding of mental health and mental dysfunction. Now, let me clarify. When we talk about spirituality and psychiatry, I'm not here talking about labeling mental illness as demon possession or other spiritual warfare. I'm talking about spirituality as the core of good mental health. So my approach to treating mental illness is I use what is called the biopsychosocial cultural approach. You have to take into consideration all of these aspects of an individual. You have to basically start to peel, as if you're peeling an onion backwards. Someone would present with mental health issues, and you have to get to the core of it. You have to peel back layer by layer and layer. And each layer will reveal to you either something biological, something psychological, something in their social experience, things like abuse and so, cultural, and the spiritual is right in there. Now, the scientific literature has become very rife with the whole impact of spiritual belief and practice on mental health. So we hear about mindfulness meditation and other practices like that. And the scientific studies show that these are associated with better coping, improved self-esteem, better physical health, and healing. But more recently, we are finding principles now of faith and prayer, gratitude and forgiveness entering the scientific literature. And these are being posited as effective in reducing mental distress, reducing depression and anxiety, reducing suicidal behavior. Now, these are religious principles and important elements of mental health treatment that are many times not included as part of a typical treatment plan. My experience has shown me that the patients who embrace these elements do better. So let's take a good example of the effectiveness of spirituality. We talk about the 12-step self-help movement for the treatment of addiction,
right?
AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, NA, and all of those. They are well-established approaches to the treatment of addiction, and they are as successful as any other intervention. And they use no pills, no doctors, no experts. It is simply a walk in spirituality, submitting to a power greater than oneself. So belief in a supernatural God who can heal and comfort will always defy scientific measurement, but that does not discredit its reality, which is readily supported by anecdotal reports of people's experiences.
There's a project that you're excited and passionate about called Breaking the Silence Project. Well, can you tell us a little bit about that, and why are you so passionate about it?
Oh gosh, now that one, so much to see. Now the Breaking the Silence project, that actually was one of the highlights of my professional experience. It spoke directly to my practice of public health psychiatry, and public health psychiatry is about reducing the risk of developing mental disorders and promoting mental wellness in those who are mentally stable. So I was around 2004 involved in research on substance abuse and HIV and the gender discrepancies in HIV risk. When I was approached by, because I knew her before, I was approached by Dr. Rhoda Reddock, a professor of gender and social change. And she simply said to me, we have a lot of work to do. And that, in effect, was the beginning of this project. I became involved in a research group that looked at gender, HIV, and sexuality. And as we prepared to embark on that research, we actually looked at all of the work that had been published in the Caribbean in this area. We met with stakeholders and we began collecting information from them on gaps that existed for research and some of the challenges they were experiencing. And what kept coming up was child sexual abuse. It was clear that this was a phenomenon that was quite taboo, not spoken about, but needed to be investigated. And that's where our project was born, Breaking the Silence Project, a multi-sectoral approach that aimed to reduce child sexual abuse and HIV, because we looked at that connection between child sexual abuse and HIV. Now, I know we could be short of time, but I just want to share a clinical experience I had that looked so closely at that connection. Yeah, right?
Please,
so
yes.
I had just graduated. I was doing my internship in Trinidad here. And I was in the pediatrics rotation. Now, HIV illness was still relatively new at that time. That was a long time ago. And a very young baby had been brought in ill and had tested HIV positive. So, of course, we had to test the parents. The mother was positive. The father was negative. So the mother's positive status explained the baby's status, but the father was negative. That mother was so heartbroken, not because of the diagnosis of her baby and herself only, but because she saw tearfully that her husband had been her only partner. And neither us, the treatment team, nor her husband had reason to disbelieve her. She herself was not ill. It was only years after, as my practice as a psychiatrist was established, that it dawned on me that that young lady had likely acquired HIV through sexual abuse as a child. Because it happens. Yeah, it happens. And at that time, back then, neither myself as the young intern nor anyone else on the pediatrics team had thought of asking her of her early life experiences. So to me, that experience way back then, plus the fact that in my practice, I kept meeting child sexual abuse as a risk factor for so many different psychiatric and psychological conditions. So it was clear. Yeah, and people don't talk about it, and clinicians don't ask about it. So the project had to be done. So that's how we embarked on the Breaking the Silence project. Now, to give you the details of it, I know I would exceed the time, but let's just say that it was a multidisciplinary partnership. It was an action research project. And what that meant, we went out into the communities and we learned from them. When we first started, we sat down as experts. We looked at our bibliography. We looked at what the literature was saying. We looked at what we thought the communities needed, and we came up with an intervention. We selected 3 communities, and we went to the first one, and we presented what we were about to do. Well, we got the shock of our lives, because that first community we approached simply said, no thanks, that's not what we want, that's not what we need. We became the learners. We became co-partners with the communities. We got new knowledge from them on child sexual abuse. What sustained it in the community? What are some of the beliefs and the barriers to addressing it? We had a full community liaison team that interacted with a well-established NGO and our research team. And I tell you, we went out there and we got information. We interviewed community members, service providers. We spoke to parents, teachers, students. We did invisible street theater. We produced soap operas, and we developed a model for intervention that could be adapted to the needs of any community to address any taboo issue. That's the Break the Silence project in a nutshell. But there was so much more, so much more.
Yes, and Dr. Reid, you really hit the nail on the head when you say that this is something that is somewhat rarely discussed, even though it's very common. And sadly, a lot of these experiences in terms of child abuse follows you throughout your adult life and impact your relationships of all kinds in a very serious way. And instances where people that I know who are now adults that are struggling as adults because of those early years of unresolved issues that they still have a problem with. Commend you on your work, and I really support everything you're doing, because these discussions need to happen and help needs to be there, available, and it's life, right? There are many that are affected with this problem. So I can see why you're passionate about it. That's
right. That's very, very true. And I mean, why am I passionate? It wasn't just research, It was impactful research where everybody benefited. The researchers, the communities, the service providers, victims and potential victims, all benefited.
Dr. Reid, there's so many people who are struggling from issues like that. And even more, even with COVID, it has really posed a lot of challenges to so many who are extremely stressed. Can you tell us what are some of the indicators of stress and how does it impact your health?
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, like you said, with the pandemic, I think everyone could identify with the experience of stress. And when we talk about stress actually has a physiological basis. So you find that a stressor impacts the brain. It acts along the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So that is the hypothalamus in the brain, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands, which produce cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Now, these are stress hormones, right? And amines. But they have an impact directly on the body that people could identify as stress. They increase your heart rate, your breathing, the pupils will dilate, your blood pressure goes up, blood flows to the muscles, your blood sugar increases, your intestinal muscles relax. Now, if you listen carefully to what those changes in the body are, you are being prepared for fight or flight. That's what the stress response is. Now, that actually is a very healthy response because that is supposed to protect us in times of danger, in times of crisis. But when the stress levels are too high or sustained high for too long, and we remain in that fight or flight mode for prolonged periods of time, that's where our mental health begins to be affected and our physical health. So we talk about psychiatry being an assessment of emotions, thinking, and behavior. That's where we look for the signs of stress. In your emotions, moody, irritable, you feel overwhelmed in the way you think. When you find yourself constantly worrying, anxious, your thoughts are racing, negative thinking, or maybe you find that you're not functioning as well cognitively as you used to. You don't concentrate as well, or the memory is not as good as it used to be. Then you have to wake up and say, hey, something is happening to me. The behavioral changes are pretty interesting because a lot of people cope with stress, but their coping is maladaptive, meaning they have unhealthy coping mechanisms. Different behaviors like eating too much, sleeping too much, social withdrawal, procrastinating. They may use drugs, engage in excess shopping, even excess exercising. There is a situation where you can exercise too much in a desperate attempt to cope. Now, those are things that we readily recognize as stressful symptoms. But then you have the physical symptoms. Some people are impacted physically when you think of what happens with those stress hormones. So people can have aches and pains. They can have almost any physical symptom, chest pain, nausea, diarrhea, vomiting. It can affect you sexually, loss of the sex drive. You can find yourself getting ill frequently because your immune system is impacted. All of these are physical symptoms due to stress. And people sometimes spend exorbitant amounts of money doing 1,000,001 tests looking for the cause, and there is nothing physical that they find because it is just stress. So we can't ignore the physical impact of stress as well.
What are some of your guidelines that you would give someone who is extremely stressed out, overwhelmed, frustrated, demotivated, and feeling helpless, which sadly seems to be how a lot of people are feeling these days?
Well, the first thing I would say, don't ignore it. Because you're right, a lot of people are feeling like that these days. And some people actually just ignore it and they keep going, not because they've made the decision to keep going, but out of necessity. So I would say, firstly, don't ignore. Recognize that you need to do something about it. And you can start with self-care. I don't know if you're familiar with the acronym New Start, NEWSTART. Very, very effective approach to self-care. It speaks of looking after your diet, and it's for nutrition, exercise, drinking adequate amounts of water, getting adequate sunshine, and let's not underestimate the positive effects of something as simple as sunshine, right? Temperance, and all of these elements that I'm speaking about in this acronym have scientific support as to the positive mental health impact. So temperance, fresh air, adequate amounts of sleep, and trusting and faith, all of those are part of self-care. Now, and you just as I talk about peeling the layers of the onion, it's not just about the self-care. Now you have to find the genesis of the problem. Once you recognize what is stressing you, if you can do something about it, fix the problem. If you can't, it means you have to cope with the problem. And most times when we talk about coping, we're talking about managing our emotions. I think it's very instructive for people to sit back and reflect, do a kind of self-inventory on how they cope. What do you do when you're under stress? Do you eat? Do you shop? Do you, pull away from people? And if you recognize that your coping is unhealthy, replace it with healthier methods of coping. Things like journaling and exercise and music. I mean, there are so many things that we can do that are not destructive to ourselves, but help us cope with and express emotions. And then we have to introspect. Is there something more? Is there something more here? Is it that I'm reacting to something maybe from my past? Is it that I have had some memories that were previously suppressed? That's right, trauma. Have these things arisen? In which case you need to seek help. And do not be afraid to seek help. Seek help, and when you get that help, talk about it so that you can help to destigmatize the whole thing of help seeking for mental health disorders. And please, I would tell every listener, don't shame others who are seeking help. What we want is really to encourage people to seek the help that they need and to adopt healthier lifestyles. And don't forget that includes things like expression of gratitude. The studies show that you express gratitude daily, you have better mental health coping.
Well, Dr. Reid, listen, we could go on forever with the information you're sharing, your experience and knowledge. We need this even more today because people are struggling. We all are. I mean, as human beings, we're imperfect. And, I think I'm seeing a change where people are becoming more open and willing to seek the help that is needed. And the support is there and the resources are there. Certainly with the work you're doing, we really appreciate all that you do and we wish you continued success. And certainly maybe we can look at having you on a program again because there's so much that I'm sure you have to share that our listeners could benefit from.
Yes, so thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me. And I most certainly would be very happy to share some more of what my experience has taught me.
Yes, and we'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Dr. Reid.
Thank you too, and you're welcome.
Okay, take care, Dr. Reid.
Okay, yes, bye.
Bye.
Laura, I got to tell you, I'm listening to Dr. Reid speak, and it's just a wealth of knowledge that as I'm listening, it confirms to me yet again that the subtleness of certain information can change the way a person thinks about their own particular place of being, can change their own wellness journey. And if you take the time to inspect yourself and then find those who can help you pull the best out of you, like a Dr. Reid, then you're going to find that this journey called life doesn't have to be as difficult as we make it because the resources are available if you're willing and hungry to learn what makes you tick and how to get better at being you. Wonderful show. I'm excited about the next show, Laura.
Yeah, I'm very, very much so, Jay. I mean, this was a fantastic interview. And, what I like too is Dr. Reid kind of shedding some light on spirituality and religion and how your faith is so important, especially at this time. So it was really great. Well, thank you all for listening. I'm Laura Butler. Continue to stay focused and safe until next time.
And this is Jay Mamie, just reminding you that you can find this podcast and all of our prior podcasts on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, Google Podcasts, of course, Amazon Music, and certainly right here at the ucc.edu.jm website. Until next time, everyone, thanks for listening.